How would it feel if you could line up your life with your cycle? And if you don't have a cycle or you don't cycle, don't check yourself out just yet. You'll still want to listen to our amazing guest, Kate Nguy, talk about the power of listening and honoring our bodies so that we can operate at our best.
Welcome to the Courage to Be podcast. I'm your host, Tanya Vasallo. And each week, I will bring you amazing guests so that you can tap into the courage to break out of old patterns and live your soul's purpose. Before we get into this episode, if by the end you enjoyed it, please follow, rate, review, and share the podcast so we can reach more people. Because here's the thing, I'm on a mission to close the gender gap in the podcasting world so that more and more women's voices are heard. If you feel that this is something you value too, then please take action by rating, reviewing, following, and sharing the podcast. We can only do this together. Check out the link in the show notes to see how this is done. And make sure to stay until the end to claim some free gifts I have for you.
Welcome back to the Courage to Be, where we have powerful, transformational conversations about life and business. And today we have Kate Nguy with us. Welcome, Kate.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let's just dive deep into this because it's an interesting topic that we have today. Share with us a little bit of your journey and how you've arrived to the type of work that you do and how you got there.
So I grew up in a very small town with a pretty normal life, 2 parents, a brother, and life was just, what society said it should be, right? There was no thinking outside the box. In fact, when I decided to go to university, right after graduating high school, I looked for a career that was going to be these powerhouse careers, like that was going to stamp me in knowing that I was doing something that society has set will fit into one of these categories that everyone should think that they want to do. So what did I do? I went to law school. And so I ended up doing 2 years of my pre-law. And there was this pivotal moment when I was in my Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms course that I just seen all these really cutthroat people that would have given their lives to be lawyers. And I remember just going, this is not for me. This doesn't feel right. This is like dedicating my whole self to a career that I don't even know if I actually feel aligned to. So this was like a pivotal moment when I think it was my first time stepping in, or dipping my toes, I should say, into rebelling against the norm of society, rebelling against like what I should be doing. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And it made sense for my parents for me to go to law school. It did not make sense for me just to get a Bachelor of Arts. I remember my dad at one point going, so what are you going to school for? And I'm like, I don't know, but I've got a degree in Bachelor of Arts. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it, but I've got a degree now. And from there, I just kept falling into these, I want to say they were like mini career paths, but they all were like the building points to get me to where I am now in their own subtle little ways. Like if I would have reflected back at the time, I wouldn't have known that they were key elements that were going to guide me into what I do today. So from university, I went into social work and worked in domestic violence as a support worker and crisis intervention worker for about 6 years. From there, I decided to travel overseas and teach abroad for a bit. I came back, was broke, and decided that I was going to work in the corporate world to make money really quickly to pay off my debt. So got into a very corporate industry where I was in customer service in bigger sales. It was for oil and gas industry, which really, as much as it was not aligned at all with me, it gave me superpower skill sets that help me now, which my transformational moment from that point was going through a health crisis. When I was in that corporate job, I met my husband. We started to try to have kids, and I unexpectedly had infertility problems. I went through 3 ectopic pregnancies, which meant 3 losses.
Can you just share with us what an ectopic pregnancy is for anyone that might not know?
Yeah. So an ectopic pregnancy is when the egg implants into the fallopian tube and not in the uterus, which is life-threatening because the fallopian tube doesn't have space. It's just a tiny little body part. And so when the egg starts to grow or the embryo starts to grow in there, it will rupture and you will internally bleed and die. And the baby's not viable either. So when there's an ectopic pregnancy, you have to terminate the pregnancy. And if you catch it soon enough, you can just terminate it through medication. If not, you have to go into surgery to actually remove that part of the fallopian, well, remove the whole fallopian tube that has been damaged because of it. So I went through one surgery and the other two we caught quite quickly. But it was after the second one that I went into a spiraling crisis of going, why this now, right? Like what's happening? I've met my partner. We're trying to have a family. We have a house, like everything up until this point, for the most part, was kind of aligned and easy and just like I was in control. And for the first time in my life, I lost control. And I just remember there was this moment of reflection of going, I feel broken. And medical community, there was no solution really that they could offer me. And I just had to sit with it with myself of going, well, what's next? And it was this deep realization that I wasn't living my life's purpose, that I was stressed out, that I didn't really enjoy life anymore, that I was just moving in the motions. And so in a blink of an eye, I decided just to quit my job. I had nothing to fall back on. I remember everyone asking me like, what's going on? Is there something bigger happening? And I was just like, no, I just feel like in order for me to heal my health and for me to live the best life, it can't be here, because I loved the people I worked with, but I didn't like the industry. I didn't like the work. So, and I should say I didn't like the work. It wasn't the work that I was born to do, be it. Like I was good at what I did, but it wasn't what I was born to do. I was born to be a change maker. And that was not being me being a change maker at all. And so I jumped, and without any career, without any idea what I was going to do for work. And these little things just kept trickling into my path to give me like 2-month contracts to do this that was exciting and new, and, an opportunity here. And before long, I dove deep into alternative medicine. I learned a lot about what was happening in my body through different lenses. So rather than just relying on conventional medicine to heal my body, I started to learn about traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, and starting to look outside the box of how one could heal their body and what the body was actually talking to us about, which then like spurred curiosity that I had never experienced in my life before. I grew up in a small town where we didn't have acupuncturists or Reiki practitioners or any of these other things that I was starting to dip my toes in hopes that it would help. And along the way, I ended up healing my body, which I was told would not happen, that I would never have a viable pregnancy because of how many ectopics I had. And I healed my body and went on to having 3 babies. And so I used that inspiration for a long time to teach women about their bodies and about fertility in particular. I went back to school as a yoga therapist and got my certification and focused on women's health. And in that journey of working with fertility, I started to learn a lot about the menstrual cycle and how you can't really remove a healthy menstrual cycle from fertility. They go hand in hand. So if someone's on a journey for fertility, they have to heal the cycle. And for women who don't want to have kids, but are having endometriosis or fibroids or any of these other womb conditions, they need to heal their cycle. And so it started off as me healing my own fertility journey, and then using that fertility journey to inspire others to find hope in their fertility journeys has now turned to me working with women on all different levels, whether it be to achieve pregnancy, whether it be just to heal their own body, whether it is just to live an inspired life, which is where a lot of my work is now focused. I like to call myself a womb revivalist because that's what I want to do. Is I want women to revive the energy of their womb space. I want women to feel empowered and inspired by using their menstrual cycle and the wisdom of their womb to align themselves to divine feminine energy and to really start living a life that's in sync with their hormones. So rather than us always pushing against the grain, we're actually living in alignment and seeing how these shifting hormones each have a gift. We're not one person, we're 4 different women. And it's how to utilize those 4 different women so that we can live our best life rather than feeling all those big feelings that I think most of us with the wombs feel, which is shame, not enoughness, too muchness, failure all the time, perfectionism. Those are all really big wounds of the womb.
Wow, this is fascinating. I love that we can have this topic. So many questions that I have here that we're going to dive deep into, Kate. Let's start with the wisdom of the wombs, and we'll go backwards because I have some other questions. Talk to us about the wisdom of the womb and how we can tap into this, and what is the wisdom of the womb?
So most of us have been given some version of a health class about our female body parts, usually probably in junior high, which was a health class that was really just how not to get pregnant, sex ed class. It taught us zero about what was actually happening in our body and what is actually happening with hormones. And then if you layer that with the patriarchal system and how society has been trained to shame or to hide the menstrual cycle, we have completely been living in disconnect from our body. So our cycle, our womb, I always say that the uterus is a physical body part. This is how I envision it, is that the uterus is this body part and has ovaries and has fallopian tubes and has a cervix. It has all those little body parts there. The womb space itself is like this energetic container that houses all of it. So as we know, we have these different energy centers, and this womb is like an energy center. You can take those body parts out, but the energy, the container, the house per se is still there, even though you remove the walls. And so we haven't been trained to understand what makes us different than our counterparts of men. We have a society that is built on this patriarchal system, which operates on this 24-hour clock and totally disregards the lunar cycle of 28 days. Masculine energy functions on the sun, on the 24 hours. Women, or the feminine energy, focus on the lunar cycle, the 28 days. And we all have cycles. We're connected to Earth, whether we are female or male. But men, their cycle resets every 24 hours. So we can see how the workday, we can see how life really supports that 24-hour clock, right? We wake up, which is kind of like the spring energy. We get ready, we get off to work, we jump and do whatever we need to do. Like we're full of energy and full of inspiration, and we're in motivation mode. And then we get into the midday, and that's kind of like our ovulation, right? It's the summer energy where we are deep in conversations. We're taking things that happen through the day and starting to bring them into a space where they can develop deeper, right? Where we're having these conversations, we're having sales talks, we are approaching people on selling our ideas. We're in conversation and we're connecting, right? For women, ovulation is a time of deep empathy. It's a time where we can really relate and connect and communicate. And then if you think when the workday ends, right, around that 5 o'clock till, let's say 9, 10, depending on when your bedtime is, that's our fall. For women, this is our PMS phase. So men after work, when they come home and it's like, I just need to pause because I had a busy day. I don't want the kids bugging me. I need to be left alone. I want to watch the TV. I want to be on my phone, and they just want to disconnect. That's their PMS phase. And then they go to bed, and that's their menstruation. That's their winter. So if you look at the 24-hour clock and how a man cycles through it, a woman cycles the exact same way, but we need a full month. We need 28 to 30 days-ish, approximately, give or take a few. And we experience that same 24-hour clock in a longer duration. So the way that I like to teach women it, so that it makes it simplified, is just cut the days of your cycle, however many days in your cycle, cut it into 4, divide by 4. And each of those little segments is one of those phases or one of those seasons that we experience outside. It's our inner summer, our inner spring, our inner fall, or our inner winter. And if you can, and I love relating it to nature, because when we relate to nature, we can really feel that energy. Like I know what it feels like when spring comes and the snow is melting where I live, and there's no longer any cold water or weather, and I don't have to wear mittens and a toque anymore. Like there's this, like, thank God we're in this season where things are about to bloom. And that is us coming out of our menstruation. And we're there for a week. We really get like these big hits of like, I can't wait to start all these projects. I can't wait to start these things. We're full of energy. And then we go into an inner summer where we're really social, where we really want to connect. We want to be seen. Like this is where we don't struggle with visibility as much as women. And then we go into our PMS phase, which society has labeled us as, which is really just our inner fall. It's a time of harvest. It's a time of shutting things down and preparing for hibernation. It's a time for us to go within and clean off the to-dos so that we can rest in our inner winter, right? What we would do with our harvest here is no different than how we need to harvest our body and how to honor that ending of that cycle. And I think this is where we as women have not been taught properly about our cycle, and where we struggle now. We struggle in our careers. We struggle as a parent. We struggle in our marriages. We struggle in our self-care, is because we don't really understand our own language of our bodies. When we talk about what is womb wisdom is us intimately starting to learn our 4 seasons and how we feel in those 4 seasons and what our medicine is. So for me in spring, I know this is when I'm a really fun parent. I know this is when I can love going to the playground, or I'll go tobogganing and I'll do all these outward energy things because I have the stamina for it. I know that in my ovulation, this is a great time for me to bring up any conflicts that happened in any other phase with my partner or my husband and start to discuss them here, because I can articulate better. I can hold space for his feelings. I don't take things so sensitively. I don't feel like he's attacking me. Like we can have really good healing conversations here. And then in my fall, when I start to get those quote unquote PMS symptoms, that's because I'm not actually caring for myself. This is when I'm trying to push myself to meet outside expectations. And so this is when I start to feel grouchy, or when I start to feel like I'm irritated with my husband, or, we're fighting, or, the kids are just, it's too much. I'm just snapping at them all the time. It's because I'm giving too much of me to everybody else, and I'm not saying no and taking care of myself, which just means I need to remove myself, close the door, and spend some time alone with me. Whether that be working, I get a lot of stuff done in my fall. I love the fall because I just sit down and I tend to all the tasks that need to be finished. But I get grouchy if someone opens my door and interrupts me and asks me for help for something, because I'm not in an inward or an outward space anymore. I'm in an inward space. So that's going to be responsibility of somebody else to help them, or, to tend to those things. You'll often hear me say in my fall, you can go ask your dad. You can go ask your dad. There's more than one parent. You can go ask your dad, right? Where in the spring, I'm like, yeah, I can do it all. Super mom. And then the winter, I just really honor that I need to rest. If I don't rest, my whole next cycle is going to be wonky. I'm not going to have the energy and the stamina to be the best versions of all 4.
This is so beautifully said, how you've put the words together, and actually an understanding of our own bodies and cycles. Because I've been trying to align and at least have my calendar with my cycle and running my business according to my cycle. I want to say for the last maybe 2 or 3 years, at least 3 years. It must have been maybe even during COVID or before COVID. So sometimes we forget COVID times. So yeah, 3-4 years maybe. And where I started was putting on my calendar, because I'm pretty regular. So in my calendar, my Google Calendar, it says period, rest, do not book anything. And it's in red for those 4 or 5 days for that whole week. Sometimes I can honor it. Sometimes I skip, because life happens. But what would you suggest? Because that's a good first step for us listening, or if this is the first time you've ever even heard about this, because anyone that's listening to this, whether you're a man or you're a woman, here's the great thing of what Kate's mentioning. If you're a woman, it's a better way to start running your life. If you're a man, and you have a partner, you have women in your life, whether it's your girls, you know, that are daughters, or your wife or your mother. Well, mother might be in menopause or something, but coworkers, it could be any other women that are in your life. What a great tool to understand this. So I love that you're explaining it, and you did such a beautiful job doing that. But how do you incorporate this with those around you? You know, like with your kids, with your husband? Like, have you educated your husband on like, hey, I'm in ovulation week, I'll take the to bed. And then when you're during your period, you're like, I can't do anything. I'm resting. I am PMSing right now. I need to just retreat. I've tried here and there, but I haven't really, maybe haven't found the exact words. And I do think it's a general education first for women to understand their body, so then they can and start implementing these things. But then how can we start educating the rest of the people around us? So can you give us some tips on that, Kate?
The first thing that I would say is that what I noticed is that I had to get comfortable with my own body first. I had to get comfortable with this idea of being a cyclical person and no longer seeing my cycle as just a menstruation and an ovulation. I actually had to invite in this idea that there's four different phases, and that each of the hormones, because it's the hormones that change the energy level. So like in our first half of our cycle, we have estrogen, and estrogen primes our brain for communication, for thinking, for being outward, right? It makes us it's like a social drug where progesterone is in the second half of our cycle. And that is actually a hormone that is sedative. If you think of the reason why behind that, it's because technically before, well, I shouldn't say technically before. What I should say is that the way society's seen it is that we were meant to only give birth, right? And so progesterone primes the womb to hold a life. So it's making you slow down so that you stop and your body can actually build a baby versus you powering through. If we had estrogen our whole cycle, we would just keep going. But the thing is that right now in society, we're acting like we do have estrogen our whole cycle, which is why we're cranky and we're run down and we're overwhelmed and we're burnt out, right? It's because we're acting like we always have that estrogen, and we're not really listening to the characteristics of the progesterone that's saying, hey, chill out, rest. You need this, right? We all need rest. And so the first thing that I had to do was really get comfortable with knowing my body, understanding this 4 phases, and then just being curious on my own for myself. I didn't start off by communicating this with the world. I started off with like, how can I live in alignment? And what I found is the more that I did that, the more compassion I had for myself, the more forgiveness I had. So when I was cranky in my luteal phase or my inner fall, it was like, oh, of course you are, because you're still trying to act like you aren't about to bleed right away. And so like there was this awareness that had to happen. And then I was able to take care of myself better. And then what I started to do, once you feel comfortable with it yourself, is we need to start talking about it. Society, the patriarchal system has set us up to feel like talking about the menstrual cycle is shameful. Like we are never supposed to talk about the fact that we bleed. Everybody out there knows that we do, but yet we pretend like we don't. It's kind of like the pooping conversation. Nobody actually says that they poop, but we all do, right? Like, and so this is the thing that happens, is that this is a biological response, but we're trained to be shameful of it. We're trained to be like, don't talk about this because it's going to make others uncomfortable. The reality is that it's not us having a menstrual cycle that makes people uncomfortable. It's that nobody's been trained in understanding the menstrual cycle in a way that is healing or that is a nurturing conversation. So that way it is just like everyday conversation, right? And so one of the big pivotal moments that I had was, like, I'm sure a lot of people out there, is during COVID, when you were in isolation. We had 3 little kids, 1 that was a newborn and 2 that were in kindergarten and grade 1. And we were having to homeschool as well as work from home and have an infant. Like, we were frazzled. There was no self-care, and tension was rising in our relationship with my husband and I. And there was one pivotal moment where I was like, what is happening? This isn't us. And he was like, I can't take care of myself. Like I don't feel like I'm getting any me time. And I was like, and I'm not either. So then it's like, well, how do we fix this? And I was like, okay, well, let's look at it from my cycle. My cycle says that the first half, I have way more energy. I know that I can take on a lot more. So we made a plan that in the first 2 weeks of my cycle, during my spring and in my summer, so my follicular and my ovulation, that he would go and have a night to himself after work once a week, right? Like at least as a minimum. And if needed, more was needed, we'd discuss it and that could happen, right? But I didn't care if it was going out with friends. I didn't care if it was going to Home Hardware. Like I really didn't care what he was doing, but he needed to go do something for himself. And I knew that I energetically had the capacity to take on more. But then we set the boundary that if that was happening, I also need self-care. So that my self-care was to come in the second half of the cycle. So when I was in my luteal or PMS phase and in my menstruation, I was to be able to carve out more time for myself, to remove myself so that I can nurture me. And this started to become our dialogue in our relationship. We even started to use this for his business meetings. When he would get called out of town and have to work out of town, he was like, listen, I have to go for a meeting. Should I do it this week or this week? And I was like, well, let me look at my schedule. Let me look at my cycle. And we'd pick the best week. You can't always perfectly line it up.
Yeah.
But then it was like, okay, I know that I'm going to be like 2 days away from bleeding when you're going on this 4-day work trip. Can we call in help? Who can we call in? Can we call in your sister to come help me? Or can we have my mom come spend the night? There was times where I felt like I was already so depleted that I was like, oh, having my mom here might be too much of a trigger in the sense that that's bringing up my own childhood stuff. And I'm just going to feel more agitated. So that's not a solution. So in those cases, then it was like, okay, well, can we order in suppers for those nights, or can we pre-make some meals and so that you don't have to worry about cooking? So like, this is how we talked about it, is like, okay, we know where I'm at in my cycle. We're knowing that we're asking one person to take on more of the workload as a partnership. So what can we do to help balance that a bit? And it started to really make a lot of difference in our relationship. Like we could communicate and he could understand that it was not me always asking him to do 110 things, but more so that it was my body, my hormones needed something a little bit different every few weeks. And we really work on that now. Even when we, start to get on each other's nerves, it does usually pop up at some point going, well, where are you at in your cycle? And so then I'm like, I'm here. And it's like, okay, well, this makes sense. Let's hold this conversation for 2 weeks and we'll have it during ovulation. Like, let's just take a break. Right. So that was one conversation, one way to integrate it. Another way that I integrated it, and this was a pretty profound one that just happened this past year, was that our Thanksgiving that we were going to have, I called my mom because I realized that Thanksgiving, the Friday that we'd be driving to her house, which was 3 hours away, would be the first day of my menstruation. And I was like, and I know the pattern of us going to my mom's house because my brother lives there and my brother and my dad had a company together, is that usually they would be busy working on the weekends. So my brother, who's divorced, his kids would be at the house. My mom would be making a meal and I'd be expected to take care of 5 children. And I was like, that's not going to work for me. Not on day one of my cycle. That's not going to work. So I called my mom up and I said, listen, I know that this is a holiday that we've been planning, but I'm going to start my bleed. And if my brother and my dad have a job, I can't take care of 5 kids. And I can't ask my husband to do that because he's going to be irritated with me. Like he can watch our 3, but he can't watch all 5. And I know you have to make a meal. So either my brother has to stay back and watch his kids, and you guys got to understand that I might be checking out a lot to go read or just close out the door so I can out of the noise and out of the chaos. And are you going to be okay with that? And it was so funny because my dad was in the background. And so like, here's me talking about my cycle on speakerphone and my dad can hear it. And he was like, oh, that's okay. I'll watch the kids. And my mom was like, don't come, because we know how this is going to go. If your dad says he's going to watch the kids, he's going to have the TV on, they're going to fight. He's going to be in the office doing some quoting or something and forget that he was supposed to do this. And then you're going to be frustrated. So let's just plan a different weekend. So we planned our family Thanksgiving around my cycle. We said, you know what? This is just a date on a calendar. Does it really matter? Can we just postpone it by, a week or 2 when I have full of energy and I know that I can pick up the extra slack that's needed? So that way, if any of the men get pulled away and I'm left with 5 kids, I'm not going to feel like I'm losing my mind. And so that's what we did. We just rescheduled. We rescheduled Thanksgiving according to me and not a calendar. And it worked perfectly. But as much as it sounded like a scary conversation to have with my mom and dad, I didn't feel scared to have with my mom to set the boundary of saying, I'm not watching 5 kids. It felt a little bit uncomfortable at first for my dad to be on that conversation. But then like when he was like, okay, no, I can totally do this. I was like, okay, we can have these conversations. We can start talking about this stuff. And so it's about knowing your body and then starting to play with it of how can I talk to people about it, right?
Yeah, I love it. What a great example. I'm guessing that the postponed Thanksgiving was wonderful.
Yeah, everyone was happy
to do it. See, wow. Can you imagine if we planned our holidays around our cycles, if we planned our business and our work? I mean, can you imagine what would the world look like? And what's your vision of like corporate? Like instead of, because I understand, like this is not bashing patriarchy or men, or this is how it was set up. Men were the ones that would go to work. So it was set up on a 24-hour calendar. Mm-hmm. But now that women are in the workforce, what would that look like? What's the vision you have, Kate, if we could have these conversations with the men in our life, as well as first with the women to understand their body and educate themselves about it and honor it, but then to be able to have those conversations with the men in our lives, whether it's at work, whether it's in our family, what would the world look like? What's the vision you have?
I think that COVID really helped set the stage for this conversation, because COVID was this thing that happened to all of us, regardless of your gender. And it made the whole world rethink how it was doing. All of a sudden, like, you got to remember, the patriarchy isn't that it's a male system. Patriarchy is that it's a power system, right? It is that there's one person on top and the rest have to follow the rules so that one person is successful, right? Or the one person has control. And with COVID, if we want to look at it as these company heads, they like to have a clock where you punched in and punched out. You put in hours. You didn't put in quality, right? You had to show up 9 to 5, perhaps, whatever your hours were. And you clocked in and you said, I did this amount of time. Now you have to pay me. And what COVID did to us is it said, you have to trust your employees. They have to work from home. And you won't be able to watch over them. And you're going to have to trust that the work gets done. And guess what? The work got done. People found creative solutions of how to work outside of the office and trust their employees and trust that things were going to still be in business for the most part. And this is what honoring the divine feminine, this is what honoring our cycles in business really looks like. Rather than saying women have to work on a clock, you can do that. If you want, make it a clock system. But just know that if you do that, you're going to have 2 weeks where they're stellar employees, and you're going to have 2 weeks where perhaps their production looks different, right? Mm-hmm. So why not utilize their skills? Why not break the ceiling on this and start thinking about the fact that if I just say, these are your tasks and they need to get done, schedule them appropriately for yourself, those would all be met. Who cares if it was done in 6 hours or 8 hours? For those that are really focused on the clock and need the clock, I always say one way that we could shift the system is that we give a 2-day menstrual leave, right? So the first 2 days of bleed, you let women rest and you let them either work from home, not on hours, but work on home as they're tending to whatever they need to do. Their health is going to improve. A lot of women have to call in sick because they have severe womb issues like endometriosis, fibroids, PCOS, all these things that wreak havoc on our lives, right? And so if we allowed them 2 days, their wellness would improve. And if their wellness improved, there'd be less sick days. And plus you're allowing them to honor so that they have longer longevity. Plus they're going to probably work harder for you because you haven't made them question or answer why they needed 2 days off, right? They just have a 2-day menstrual leave. And so those 2 days, that's what, approximately maybe 16 hours at most that they'd be missing out on. Let them make up that 16 hours in the first half of their cycle, in their spring or their summer. So in their follicular or their ovulation. Maybe they tack on an extra hour and a half each workday for those 2 weeks. That wouldn't impact their life huge, but they would have the estrogen to support them and that they would have the stamina to work that hour and a half. It wouldn't feel depleting for them. It would actually feel really alive for them because they're already like, they're so excitable because they have this idea and they really want to present it and they really want to get it out there. And like they have all that bubbliness that they're going to get a lot more done during that part. And then you let them have a little bit of a break for the time that they need the break, right? There's so many creative ways that we can look at it. Now, a lot of men or a lot of people that are having a hard time with this concept would be like, but wait a minute, that would never work because men would always be like, why does she get this special privilege? Well, she has different body parts than you. She has a different hormonal system than you. And my response to that would be, there's two different things to look at it. One is, and I can't remember who quoted this, and I want to say it was like an article in the New York Times or something that was around working with your cycle. And she said, think of how bizarre it must have felt for the first person to have a maternity leave. That first time someone got 3 months off because they had a baby. Can you imagine all the men in the office? They're probably like, why is she so special? Just because she popped out a baby, she gets to not work and get paid for it. Like it was probably a really foreign concept at one time. And now, at least where I live in Canada, women get a year off and nobody questions it. Nobody's like, oh, really? Because she had a vagina, she gets a year off. It's like, no, she had birth. This is policy. This is what we do, right? So we just have to get comfortable that we're about to shift and shake things up a bit. The second way that I would look at it is that Alexandra Pope says this in one of her books. I think it was the Wild Power book, but she has two that are out there. And she quotes in there that if you could imagine working nonstop and ignoring your circadian rhythm. So you work all day and you keep working past midnight. You work all the way until 7 a.m. the next day and you just don't stop and you keep pushing yourself. That is what we're asking women to do right now. You would create pure chaos in society by pushing against your circadian rhythm to sleep and to rest. But that is what we're asking women to do with their rhythm, is to ignore it and to keep pushing, even though physiologically everything in our body is saying, stop, rest, because we're about to do something big so that you can become even a better version, right? Women are such great examples of the death and rebirth cycle. If you give us the space, our intuition, our creative solutions, our out of the box thinking becomes so heightened. We can become an asset. And this is why before the patriarchal system really came into play, what was it, like 5,000 years ago or 500 years ago? I don't even know how long it was. Long time. It was probably 500,
Thousands.
wasn't it?
I think it's more in the thousands.
Thousands of years ago. Before that happened, so. There was the red tents. And the red tents weren't just to shame women and stick them in a tent and say, you're bleeding, you're disgusting, we can't see you in our world. It was, they knew the value of putting women in community together to rest, to feel inspired, to share stories, to take a break from mundane tasks. And they came out and were the leaders of the community. They would come out with these aha ideas of the next best step. It wasn't men who ran the society. It was men and women working together. So it was no longer you get special treatment. It was like, this is what your body needs for us to have deeper wisdom in our community. And this is what the man has to do to bring its skill set into the equation, right? And so we need to stop seeing that we all have to be the same and start seeing that we're a little bit different and we need different systems for it. And we need to trust is the big word here. We need to trust that if we allow one to listen to their innate wisdom, that there's going to be even more productivity. There's going to be even better products or better exchanges of energy or better information. We will grow better as a society if we allow ourselves to be different.
Yeah. Oh, amen. I hope some of the businesses can listen to this and start implementing some of this stuff. Because,
and you know, it's not that far off because there are companies out there, mainly women-ran companies, that are starting to do period policies.
Oh, really? What company?
There are.
Do you know any of these companies?
Anyone who follows Chani, who does the horoscopes, she has it. There was another business coach team that I know, they have a coaching like team. They're pretty high up there. They have a period policy. you'd be surprised at how many times I see job postings that stayed in there that there's a period policy now.
I'd never even heard of that term. That is amazing. Yeah. Because as you're saying, you said it so well that, women are just pushing themselves. That example of the circadian rhythm, of just like working 24/7. Do you think that's why so many women suffer from like adrenal fatigue, autoimmune disorders, diseases, fibromyalgia, all these different things?
Definitely. That's one of the parts of the equation. The other part would be is that as societies have grown and we become more modernized or urbanized, we've lost community. Women were never meant to raise children on their own. They were meant to have communities and people to support them so that they could care for themselves. So instead now you have women who aren't listening to their womb wisdom or listening to their rhythm. You have women who are trying to be super mom and trying to work because the cost of living is so high. So now we have to work as well. And you add all of those together in that equation, all you get is burnout because there is no way that you can expect one sex to do everything that's being expected of us to do. And that's not to knock men. There's some really great dads out there, but there is a different level of expectation sometimes for women to do all the extras, all the things that's like, oh, well, that's only a 5-minute thing, or that's only going to take you 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds, after you add up 10 of them, that's 3 minutes, right? Like those things add up. And there's so many of them: booking doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, school field trips. Like there's so much. And we're
play dates,
overextending because women are givers. We are heart driven, right? That's part of the feminine energy, is wanting to be that source of giving, right? And we feel that heightening so much in ovulation. And I guess that would be another part that I would add into it, is that society likes when we say yes. They like ovulation Kate a lot more than they like menstruating Kate, right? They like Kate who says
menstruating
yes,
Kate
yes.
becomes the bitch, that no one wants to talk about.
And so what we do as a society, and because we're not trained about our bodies, is we constantly say yes. So we're in our ovulation and we feel it. We're like, yes, yeah, I can totally do that. Oh yeah, you know what? I can take Nana to her doctor's appointment in 10 days. That's no big deal. And oh yeah, I'll book the kids' appointments for their eyes next week. And we overload in this, because the first half of our cycle is the power of yes. And the second half is the power of no. So we say yes, but we say yes and we book it into our power of no phase. And that's where we feel the burnout. That is where actual PMS has come from, is because we've scheduled ourselves so heavily when estrogen leaves and progesterone arrives and says, hey, it's coffee break time now. And we can't take a coffee break. I've already last week said yes to these 10 things, and now I got to do them. And so we do them, but we do them with resentment, and we really run down our body, and we run out of energy and steam and motivation. And then we don't give ourselves permission to rest. And I was a perfect example of this last week. I pushed myself so hard saying yes in my ovulation because there were some big things that had to happen in my personal life that I was like, I got to get this all done. And then when it came to the next week, when I went into my inner fall and I no longer had to do these bigger, heavier tasks, but I hadn't also cared for myself, I literally had zero motivation. I could not work. I tried and I would fall asleep. Like, I'm not someone who takes a nap, and yet I could not keep my eyes open when driving. Like, I literally had to go home and sleep for 2 hours because I have never felt that exhausted besides in pregnancy. And why? It's because I had such a heavy ovulation week of yes, that I literally burnt myself out because I forgot to take care of myself. I forgot to eat properly. I forgot to have a hot bath and just nurture my soul for a little bit. I forgot to meditate because it was like, I didn't have time for that stuff. And I paid the price. Most of us would just keep pushing through it. We would have just went to work tired and drank 10 cups of coffee. Instead, I was like, no, I'm not going to sedate myself with coffee. I'm just going to go and take a nap because that's what my body needs. And if I don't do it, I'm going to become unwell. And that's what I kept telling myself. I will get sick if I just don't rest right now. So I'm just going to rest and I will pay the price and I will catch up the week after.
But this is great for you to give us this example, because what would you have done if you had all these appointments and your body's just saying, no, I want to, as soon as we're done with this recording, I want to go look at my calendar to make sure I'm in alignment, not just with my period, because sometimes I'll skip it and I'm still doing like calls and meeting up with people and What would you do? Like if you did have those appointments or these things that you have to do, would you still push through? I mean, you said that you went and took a nap, but what if you had commitments? Would you be honest and tell the person just like, hey, I'm going into PMS phase, and take it as an opportunity to be able to educate them? Because I think that's what we're needing more of, especially, you know, between women. I try and practice this. Like if I'm like, you know what? No, I woke up exhausted today. I did not sleep at all. I know I have to do 3 podcast records or whatever. I might cancel it. And to me, it might land bad if someone else does it, but I try and come from a place of compassion and understanding and saying, if we don't normalize this, we'll keep on pushing, doing. So in your case, would you have called people and just let them know what was going on?
One of two things. If I felt like it was a safe enough relationship, or it wasn't that important for me, like if I didn't really value the appointment that much, I would have just called and rescheduled. And often I am very honest. I'll just say, listen, my period's about to come and I just don't feel well. Like I have to take a day. Right. And I have done that in the past. The other thing that sometimes I do when I know that it is something that's really important to me and it's a commitment that I don't want to flake out on or cancel out on, is that I have to plan how to care for myself afterwards. It's like, okay, I'm going to push through and I'm going to do this, but what am I going to do for myself afterwards? So if I have these meetings, I have 3 meetings set up, then I'm going to do them. But then I'm going to order in food for supper tonight because I'm not going to cook supper.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell my husband when he comes home, listen, I need a timeout for about 2 hours because I'm pretty burnt out. I may go take a nap, or I might just read a book, or I might just have a hot bath, or I might just sit in my bed and stare at the wall for 2 hours. I've done that before where it's just like, I just need to just do nothing. Like I'm just immobilized. I may also go to bed earlier going, okay, this is the week where I've overbooked myself and I'm going to run out of energy, which means I need good sleep. So I'll probably put on a meditation to help me fall asleep at 8:30 because it's outside the norm for me to go to bed that early. And I'm going to get a deep, deep sleep and I'm going to have a good sleep. So those are all things that you can do. I think there's so much power in just owning it sometimes. So a great example of this is I did poor planning. Well, it wasn't that I did poor planning. It was out of my control a little bit that I had to speak on stage at a university. And I was supposed to give this 20-minute speech about the cycle. And I was a day away from my period. And so what did I do? I went on stage, I introduced who I was, and I just said, hey, listen, I'm a day away from my period. What you're going to learn today is that progesterone, we really don't have vocabulary. We forget our phrases and our words sometimes. I'm going to do my best up here, but I'm going to warn you that if I have to take a moment to think of what was my next statement or what was my word that I was thinking of, it's because of my hormones. And then I went into my speech and it was perfectly fine. It was a beautiful speech, but I owned my truth. I just said, listen, don't expect 110 from me, expect 65, but I'm still going to entertain you. I promise. And it worked. And it relieved so much pressure off of me of feeling like a failure. It also broke some of the stigma out there. There was men in that crowd and maybe they got uncomfortable, but I really didn't care because this is the reality. And the thing is that we have to break the shame on this, because talking to our kids, talking to our partners, talking to my kids' teachers sometimes about my cycle, it's us making the cycle normalized. It's owning it and telling people this is no different than a medical condition. This is something that happens to us every month and we can plan for it a little bit. And it's just a way for us to break some of the stigma. So, I had to book my son for preschool.
Understanding each other and having compassion for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, we're in this society where women, we keep pushing, we're trying to prove ourselves, because of patriarchy, we're trying to be superwoman. On top of that, we don't have family around to help support us with everything. I mean, I try and set up with close friends because I don't have family around. like, look, it's my period, and just let me know when your week is, and I'll try and take the girls, I'll take them on a play date or something so you can get some rest or something. And I do believe that the more we can normalize and have these conversations and be honest with each other, especially from woman to woman, I think that's the first level. And then once woman to woman, you could say, hey, Kate, I can't do the recording today. I'm about to get my period and I can just feel the cramps. You're going to totally understand. You're going to have compassion for it. You'll reschedule. It's totally fine. The next level would be to start having these conversations with the men in our life so that they can understand us. So, oh my God, I could do a whole other episode because I have so many other questions that I want to ask you. But as we're wrapping up, I have a couple questions regarding, for those women or even men that are listening to this for the first time, like this is like news to them, like what women, work better in this time of the cycle than this other time, or even for ourselves to start understanding ourselves. Can you give us like a little brief, and you touched on it a little bit, but like just some tips of what you would want to plan for, like on that spring, like I think with the seasons, it's easier to understand, at least it is for me, than trying to understand follicular ovulation, like all these different terms, they seem too scientific for me. But could you give us some tips to the listeners of how we can start using this so that we can then go and explain it to those in our life, whether it's other women in our life, family members, or the men in our life?
So understanding the cycle and the medicine that's in each of the phases is really important. So our spring season, which is the time after our period, what our message is here, or what our medicine is here, is to cherish ourselves. So what that means is that we're coming out of our darkness, out of our bleed days, out of our deep rest. And we have estrogen that's now making us feeling really outgoing. It's coming in. And so to cherish ourselves here is to know that with this rising energy, not to go full force right from day one, but instead go, I'm giving a little bit of myself to the world. But then I'm also going to make sure that I slow down for a minute and remember to take care of me, right? Move slowly in it. And I always use this example because where I live, we have really cold winters. And as soon as we get a spring day, like today, for instance, there's hardly any snow because we've had a few hot days where all the snow is now almost melted. I get so excited because I can see buds on the tree that right away, I just throw on my running shoes and I walk outside without a jacket. And I get 2 steps and I'm like, oh my God, it is cold still. Like the sun is shining, the buds are there, but we're not in summer yet. So I go back inside, I put my jacket on, I may even put mitts on and go back outside, right? And so the lesson here is that if we jump too quickly, we're going to burn ourselves out because we're extending ourselves too fast. So just pull back the reins a bit and make sure that you're nurturing yourself, because our spring is a building phase. You got to remember, menstruation just wiped out everything in the uterus. And now we're rebuilding the lining. We're like making strong follicles, and we want all of that, regardless if we're going to get pregnant or not, because we want a really healthy ovulation. We want really strong hormones, and those actions have to happen for strong hormone shifts to happen. And so we cherish ourselves. We move slowly into this outward energy while still making sure that we're checking in with ourselves. When we get into ovulation or into our summer, we are the great communicator. This is the time when you want to have no rules. This is the time to have them. If you want to stay up till 2:00 in the morning watching TV and, push the limits, I'm not recommending that, but if you wanted to, your body's not going to feel the impact like it will in the other seasons. If you think of summertime, this is usually on summer vacation where we book way too many barbecues with our friends. We're up late. We're not eating all that great, but yet we're still feeling alive in our bodies, right? This is what ovulation is. It's a small little period where we can kind of break the rules a bit. We can be super social. This is a time for us to authentically be ourselves. Let the world see you, right? Let yourself be visible. You're going to feel so much better about yourself by just going big here. And then when we go into our fall, my medicine here is always move with ease. So our fall, when we swap from estrogen to progesterone, two different hormones, and we start to feel that sluggishness, that not really motivated, that I want to no longer talk to people. I want to be inward. This is where we need to make some rules for ourselves. So that way we can get tasks done, like closing our office door and just getting stuff off our desk, right? Keep the simple tasks here. It's also a time that I would say to watch for that inner critic, because this inner critic comes in during this time because we're breaking the norms of what we should be doing. So we're going to feel like, oh, you know what? No one's going to like me if I do this. I'm not going to be a good worker because I set these boundaries, or, you know, I'm going to make this person mad, or you just, the inner critic comes in. My inner critic was really strong last week. Whew, it was a hefty one, but I caught it. And I was like, listen, this isn't my truth. I know I'm just going through some stuff. So what I do is I move with ease. Often when the inner critic comes in that fall, I do a lot of tapping. So if you're familiar with EFT tapping, that's a really good time to do emotional freedom technique of these tapping points and reprogramming with words that way. I find that affirmations do not work at all for me during my fall because I can't buy into it. I can't believe this because all my hormones are telling me that this is garbage. But tapping is something physical. Like I can feel it while I'm saying it.
System,
yeah, it totally gives me a different thing. So I don't do affirmations during my fall. I do EFT. And then our winter, give yourself moments of rest. Now, we don't always have a life where we can just like say, I'm checking out for 2 days, but can you do 20 to 30% less? So I have a really strong rule during my bleed days: no laundry, no cooking, minimal childcare. And so I give myself permission to be a bad mom. I let them go on their tablets and the TV probably way more than they should during that week, but it's okay because I'm going to interact with them in the next season. I'll come back and be the good mom again. I don't cook. I'll do a lot of pre-cooking beforehand, or I'll just call my husband and say, listen, my blood started. I can't cook tonight. And he knows that he has to come home and figure out supper. He is also an adult. He knows that he can do this too, right? Like it shouldn't just fall on me. So I don't cook for my first 2 days either. I have him deal with the cooking, or we have frozen meals that we take out and that are easy. I don't do any laundry. I know when my period's about to come, I try to get as much done as I can beforehand, and it may be in piles in the dryer still unfolded. And I give myself full permission to say, you can dig through it and find your socks. Like I let go of this responsibility that I'm supposed to care for everybody here, because really the most important thing is caring for me. And so I do really little. My house looks chaotic during menstruation, and I'm a neat freak. So when I come out, this was a big lesson for me, that when I came out of my bleed days and I would see all the dishes and all the chaos because no one tended to it, I would jump back in, and I would probably jump in with a little bit of rage and anger, because it's like, I let it all fall apart. And now I've reminded myself that no, you know what? When you come out of your bleed days and you see that, it means that you rested well. So just take some time to slowly get the tasks caught up. And so when I go into my spring, my kids and I, we do the dishes together, rather than me going, we have no plates anymore. And everyone, why can't you do your own dishes? Rather than me getting like all riled up. It's like, okay, I rested well and let's do this together. So, but yeah, it's really about knowing your medicine and knowing that there's different skill sets at each of them.
And it's great to, as we go through it, I mean, some of them kind of make sense. How would you apply them for your business? My guess is like during your bleeding, your period time, maybe it's more of a time of introspection. That's how I've been trying to apply it for my business. It's just a time of introspection, coming up with ideas. I know our intuition is stronger during our menstruation, but then what kind of activities would you do for your business or for your work going into the springtime, ovulation, and fall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is a great question. So I once heard it put this way, and I thought this is a beautiful way. When you think of the creation model, is that there's an idea, then we bring that idea into something. We actually create it into its product, and we sell the product, or we try to sell the product. We build up the momentum. We talk about it. We share the excitement about it. And then after that first launch, we reflect on what didn't go good. And then we go back to the drawing board and refine it. This is what our menstrual cycle is. So in our bleed days, our menstruation, this is where sometimes we get these hits of inspiration of the next program that we want to create, or the next thing that would revolutionize our work life. If you're someone who works in an office for someone else, it might be like, this filing system would make my life so much more easier, right? So we get this aha moment. And then we go into our spring, and the spring is where we like bring the force of estrogen to like plummet this idea into practicality, right? And then we go into our summer, and this is where we tell everyone about it, right? Summer is a great time. I always say the summer is kind of like our season for being a manipulator. Because if this is where we wanted to sell something, we are great salespeople here. But we're also, if you want a raise, this is the time to go ask your boss for a raise, because we have the communication skills. We can sell ourselves. I'm valuable because of this, right? And so this is when we want to sell. This is when we want to like expose this thing we've been working on to the world. Mm-hmm. And then when we go into our fall, this is where we reflect on what worked, what didn't work, and refine it. Now, if you're someone who works in an office, you could also look at it as when we're in our spring, this might be our time of like lots of communication, lots of like putting ideas that might make our life simpler in the office into play, asking for the tools that you need, the resources that you need. This might be booking stuff in. Summer would be when you do your public speaking. This would be the time where you would do your sales calls. This would be the time where you have those conversations with your coworkers and say, like, this is what I need from you. And this is how I think we can work together and we can make this better. Our fall would be when we close the door, and maybe we just catch up on all the emails that we missed because we had all this excitement that we fell behind on our emails, which is totally okay. So now we catch up on our emails. Maybe we make our out of office or our little auto responder a little different to prepare ourselves for winter. Like, so where we clear up all those to-dos that are like nasty to-dos that we have to get done. And then when we go in our winter, maybe this is where we just clean up our desk and we start to file some papers that haven't been filed. We do the simpler things. We don't engage in conversations. We definitely don't do any big decision-making. We just allow ourselves to be a body there, but do minimal.
This is wonderful for sharing it. So much wisdom, so much womb wisdom. I love it. So share with us, please share with us, Kate, where can people find you?
Yeah. So you can come check out my website. Oh, if I could talk, I'm in my fall right now. Language is not my primary right now. And see, this is another thing. I booked this in my fall, my mistake, but I was like, I'm okay with it. I felt aligned coming to it, but I knew my communication would suck. So you can go check out my website. It's www.sherevival. She is with 2 E's. So it's SHEE and then revival. She stands for sacred healing through empowerment and embodiment, because that is how we revive our womb. .com, sorry. So sherevival.com. And there you'll see a little tab that has free gifts. There's, if you're on the fertility journey, there's a fertility yoga nidra. If you're not, there's a charting journal or a guide to self-care with the cycle in mind. So those are all free handouts that you can go and grab, ebooks. And then there's always my podcast. Come check out and listen to my podcast. It's called Aligned Womb, Aligned You, where we have these deeper conversations about how we can start living in alignment to our womb energy.
And we'll have all of these in the show notes. So my last question I like to ask before we finish up, what's one thing our listeners can do to live a life with more courage?
Get curious about your body unapologetically would be what I would say.
Wonderful.
You were given a womb for a reason. So start embracing it, because there's so much magic to be had when we unleash it. I went from thinking I was going to be a lawyer to now talking about menstrual cycles, and I feel so aligned. So be courageous in learning about your body.
Thank you, Kate. This was great. Thank you for imparting so much wisdom today with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I am so grateful that you joined me today. If you enjoyed it, there's one thing I'd like you to do. Click on the follow button so you don't miss a single episode. Leave me a rating and a review, and please share. As my way to thank you, email us a screen grab of your review at the email in the show notes, and we will send you a free Crafting Your Future guided visualization, which is so simple to do with outstanding results. It will empower you and give you the confidence to attract and create the life you've always desired. See you in our next episode.